Georgia dipped into the transfer portal this offseason more than it ever has, bringing in 10 different players to add to this Georgia Bulldogs team that had some holes in certain spots. There's one guy who I think is pretty much the consensus out there for who the most important transfer that Georgia brought in is, and that's Zachariah Branch. Zachariah Branch has gotten a lot of buzz. He's obviously a former 5-star recruit, former number 1 receiver in that 2023 class, explosive playmaker, is going to help Georgia in the kick return game. I think that he definitely is going to be an important player for Georgia on multiple levels in 2025. I think he's an important target for Gunnar Stockton, and I think that the special teams ability is a real X factor for a football team, and I think that Zachariah Branch brings that. I think he'll be impactful. I don't know to what extent as a receiver. I don't know if we're talking about a 1,000-yard receiver here. That would be a little bit more surprising. But I think that the guy that's actually potentially the most important transfer that Georgia brought in might not be him. And I know the wide receiver was a pretty big look. I mean, they led the country in drops. They needed stars. They went out and they added pieces to that wide receiver room. Branch being one of them, Noah Thomas being another, right? They added to it. But Georgia on defense has lost a lot. Has lost a lot. Lost a lot of sack production, lost a lot of tackle for loss production, total tackles production, all that. Which is why I think Ella Madozie, the outside linebacker from Army that transferred to Georgia during the spring portal window, so we didn't get to see him in red and black during spring practice, right? Because he transferred after the spring. I think that Madozie has an opportunity to be Georgia's most important transfer, most impactful transfer for this 2025 season. I think he, among a few of the other transfers, are likely instant starters for this football team, instant upgrades at certain positions. I think Madozie is a very important piece to what Georgia is going to have on the defensive side of the ball this season. I know that Branch is really good. I think Josh McCray will have a role. I think that the defensive backs that Georgia brought in will have a role. I think other guys will have roles out of the transfers, but I have a feeling Madozie is a starter and potentially a guy that could put up, 7-8 sacks. Can he have that type of season for Georgia? Let's get into it. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post. Make sure you're checking out dawgpost.com, DAWG post.com. Looking at that, we got some deals going on that are worth your while, at least taking a peek at it. If you're on our site, please sign up for the newsletter. It's the best way to just stay up to date with what's going on with the Dogs and with Dawg Post. So check all of that out. Madozie, there's been some buzz about him recently. Cole Kubelik from ESPN had something to say about him, so let's talk about that for a second. He goes, I think he has the ability, if he can add 8 to 12 pounds before he enters the new season, he could be as dominant of an edge defender as there is in this league, talking about the SEC. Trust me, we're about to get to some real edge guys in the next 2 groups. I don't know what he's talking about there. He has that kind of twitch, that kind of motor, that kind of ability, that kind of just get off and want to is anybody I've seen in the nation. That kid's got it. Saying that kid's got it. Talking about Madozie. So Madozie led Army in tackles for loss and sacks last season. He had 6.5 sacks. He was a guy that was in the backfield a lot. He is, I guess, slightly lighter than your prototypical outside linebacker, but 6'3", 245. He's, a little heavier than Nolan Smith was for Georgia. He's got that speed, and he had a really good 2024 season. He was a sophomore in 2024, I believe, a redshirt sophomore. No. He was a straight-up sophomore. So this will be his junior year for Georgia coming up, year 3. And it was year 2 when he started coming along, last year in 2024. He had games where he had sacks, tackles for loss. Obviously, he ended up with 6.5. He had multiple field goal blocks. He blocked multiple field goal attempts, I think. So now you're getting a special teams element with him. Remember a couple years ago when Jalen Carter was blocking field goals, right? Those plays are very, very important. He had 2 sacks in a game, a sack and a half in some other games. He started against big-time programs like Notre Dame. He's starting in most of these games as an outside linebacker for Army, and he was their most productive defender. Well, look, obviously wide receiver was a problem for the Dogs. At least something that they wanted to upgrade. When you have a team that's really talented across the board, problems stick out a little bit more obviously. And Georgia had issues at wide receiver, but the edge rusher position, the defensive line, that front seven, certainly has a lot of question marks heading into this coming season. And part of that is because, look, Jalen Walker, Chaz Chambliss, Mykel Williams, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins all went to the NFL. Those guys produced sacks, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 apiece. And that was really important. And so when you looked to this year, you say, okay, well, Damon Wilson's been in the rotation the last couple of years. Now he's probably going to be the primary edge rusher, right? Had, 3 sacks last year in 2024. Well, he transfers to Missouri during the winter portal window, and all of a sudden, they're even thinner at that edge rusher position. They look to Gabe Harris, who missed the spring with a labrum surgery and is likely to be their top edge rusher, a guy that had a couple sacks last year, made a little bit of an impact last year, but is likely going to be asked to have a much bigger role this coming season. That's just the truth of it. Behind him, you had redshirt freshmen, sophomores in Quintavious Johnson, Chris Jones. They just don't have a lot of depth at that outside linebacker position. They brought in some true freshmen this year that I think can kind of be hybrid defensive ends, outside linebackers, 5 stars, Darren Ikenagbon, Isaiah Gibson, players like that who I think can get into the rotation on this defense. But Georgia was missing a lot due to the transfer portal and to the NFL, obviously. And so when you watch the spring, you say, oh, man, well, Gabe Harris is out. And at G-Day, the starting outside linebackers are Chris Jones and Quintavious Johnson, and there's just not a lot of experience there. So Mendoza is a guy who not only brings a little bit of extra experience, a guy who played last year and was the best edge rusher on his team, but just brings in some talent that's just sorely needed in a position room that got hit this offseason. Part of the reason why Georgia is not viewed by many to be one of the 2 or 3 best teams in college football this coming season, part of it is because of the defensive transition. Well, that's a really big part of the reason why I think Ella Mendoza has an opportunity to be the most important and most impactful transfer that Georgia has this season. When I look at the offense, Josh McCray is going to get touches. I don't see why they brought him in other than for him to be a change of pace back with Nate Frazier. I don't see why else they would have brought him in if he's not going to get touches. Branch and Thomas obviously brought in to be starters on this offense. On defense, they brought in some secondary guys. They brought in Josh Horton, a defensive lineman from Miami. They brought him to be part of rotation and potential starters. But I think that they brought in Ella Mendoza to be a guy for them, to potentially be the sack leader for the Dogs this season. I think it's high praise when you've got some of these, regional, national media guys talking about them in that important light. When you looked at ESPN's list, they ranked the transfer portal players, the top 100 transfer portal players from this offseason cycle. I talked about that with y'all, about 3 weeks ago, it feels like. And Mendoza, I believe, if my memory serves correctly, they had him ranked as the number 31 overall transfer. They had Zachariah Branch as number 8 or 9. They had Noah Thomas, I believe, just outside of the top 50. So those are the 3 guys that people are tabbing as really important transfers for Georgia. Without question, Mendoza is the most important defensive transfer with an opportunity to be a star. Now, if he comes to Georgia and has a very, very good year, he may be a one-and-done player at Georgia where, what if he puts up 9 or 10 sacks? I don't know. I think that that's in the cards for him, especially when you just think about, hey, there's production to be picked up. There are sacks to be picked up. It's not just he's coming in to compete with Jalen Walker and those guys. And you'll see other players that have been at Georgia make an impact, but I certainly think he has an opportunity to be the most important transfer for Georgia in 2024. What do you think about this? Let us know in the comments down below. And I thank you for watching.